Ethan Carter crouched in the thick, dense underbrush, his breath steady but quick as the faint sound of buzzing drones echoed above. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The trees around him loomed large, casting long, ominous shadows that seemed to stretch out like dark fingers, creeping ever closer. The planet they had crash-landed on was hostile, its skies filled with swirling storm clouds and its ground covered in toxic swamps. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The mission was supposed to be simple, nothing more than a routine scouting assignment. But everything had gone wrong. Ethan, they're closing in. Bonner's voice crackled through the comms, strained with anxiety. The young soldier's words made Ethan's grip tighten on his rifle. He glanced back at the others, his team of 6 human soldiers, who were equally on edge. They were scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks, trying to keep a low profile. But the enemy, cloaked in their nearly invisible drones, could see them. The Valorians, an alien race with superior technology, had already launched a surprise attack, decimating their communications and rendering most of their gear useless. What should have been a simple reconnaissance mission had quickly turned into a desperate fight for survival. The team was outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in the dense forest with no clear escape. The only thing standing between them and certain death was the thick foliage and their ability to move quietly. Ethan wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, his mind racing. He knew he had to act fast. The Valorian drones were relentless, their cloaking technology allowing them to remain hidden, striking from the shadows. But they weren't alone. Ethan's thoughts flickered to the rest of his team, wondering how many of them would make it out of this alive. "Bonner, report." Ethan barked into the comms, trying to mask the edge of panic creeping into his voice. The young soldier's response came through faintly. We're losing them, sir. But they keep coming. I don't know how much longer we can hold out," Bonner said, his voice tight with fear. Ethan's mind raced, calculating the odds. The station was still 2 clicks away, and they'd never make it without being caught. He had no choice but to trust in the plan, the one that was about to go terribly wrong. In the distance, he heard the unmistakable sound of a cloaked drone hovering just above the trees. It was close, too close. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods, followed by the unmistakable sound of blaster fire. One of the soldiers screamed as they were hit, the shot taking them down instantly. Ethan's eyes widened, and without thinking, he sprang into action. "We're moving now. Head for the extraction point, fast," he commanded. He sprinted through the underbrush, the sound of boots pounding the soft earth behind him, signaling the others were following his lead. But the forest was alive with danger. More drones appeared out of nowhere, darting between the trees and firing their deadly energy beams. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly missing a blast that singed the ground where he had been standing. He could feel the heat from the energy beam on his skin, the sharp scent of burnt earth filling his nose. Panic was beginning to set in. They were out of time. "Ethan, look." Bonner's voice cut through the chaos, shaky but full of urgency. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he turned toward the sound of his comrade's voice. In the distance, behind a cluster of thick trees, he could see it. A shimmer in the air, almost imperceptible, like heat rising off asphalt. Something was there, something moving. But what? "Is it them? Is it Valorians?" Ethan whispered, half to himself, but Bonner heard him. I don't think so," Bonner replied, his voice a mixture of confusion and hope. "It's something different." Before Ethan could respond, the shimmer grew more distinct, revealing a figure standing at the edge of the trees. A flash of movement, like liquid silver, caught his eye. It wasn't an enemy soldier. It wasn't a drone. It was a woman. An alien woman. She stood tall and poised, her presence almost commanding, despite the chaotic battlefield surrounding them. She was garbed in sleek armor, shimmering with strange symbols, and her skin glowed faintly in the dim light. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Ethan's attention. It was the calm, almost serene way she moved, as though she were untouched by the battle that raged around her. In the blink of an eye, the woman raised her arm, and a blinding burst of light shot from her hand, disintegrating a Valorian drone in midair. The wreckage fell to the ground in a flaming heap. Ethan's jaw dropped. Who was this? And why was she helping them? Before he could ask, the woman's voice, smooth and commanding, crackled over the comms. "You are being hunted. Follow me, if you wish to survive." Ethan froze, unsure whether to trust her. He had no idea who she was, or what her motives might be, but the alternative was certain death. He didn't have much choice. "This way," he shouted to the rest of the team, motioning for them to follow. The alien woman led them through the dense forest, her movements swift and graceful, as if she were familiar with every inch of the terrain. The group kept their distance, cautious of her intentions, but her presence was undeniably powerful. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Ethan couldn't help but wonder how she had found them, how she knew they were in danger. "You seem surprised," the woman's voice came again, softer now, almost teasing. "Is it that unusual for a Valorian to help humans?" Ethan was caught off guard. "You're Valorian?" The woman's laughter was like the sound of bells ringing in the distance. "Not anymore," she replied cryptically. "But that's a story for another time." Ethan had a million questions, but none of them mattered. Right now, survival was all that mattered. He forced himself to focus on the mission at hand. Still, the woman's mysterious words lingered in his mind, making him wonder just how much more complicated this mission was about to become. As they made their way to what appeared to be a hidden station, the woman halted abruptly, her senses on high alert. Ethan followed her gaze into the distance and saw what she had been looking at. A cloaked Valorian battleship hovered just above the trees, its sleek black form blending perfectly with the shadows of the night. They had been found. "There's no time. We need to move now," the woman said, her tone turning serious. Without waiting for a response, she turned and led them deeper into the forest, moving faster now. Ethan's pulse raced as he followed her, his mind racing. Who was this woman? Why was she helping them? And could they trust her? The dense forest was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the Valorian battleship still hovering above them. The ground was soft, damp with the morning dew, and the air felt heavy with tension. Ethan's mind raced as he followed the mysterious woman deeper into the jungle, the rest of his team close behind, their every step carefully measured and cautious. Her movements were fluid, almost effortless, as though she knew this jungle better than the back of her hand. She moved ahead without looking back, but every now and then, she would glance over her shoulder, ensuring they were still following. Ethan's instincts screamed to be wary of her. She was, after all, an alien, and despite her aid, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't know the whole truth about her. Her sudden appearance, her unnatural calmness in the face of danger, it all felt wrong. "What do you know about her, Bonner?" Ethan whispered, trying to keep his voice steady as they trudged through the underbrush. Bonner, trailing behind Ethan, shook his head, his eyes wide with confusion and awe. "I have no idea, sir. She's not like any Valorian I've ever seen before. She's not even using their usual tech. It's like she's from another world entirely." Ethan frowned, his thoughts racing. "We need to be careful. We don't know what her game is." Bonner nodded, though there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "But she's helping us. Shouldn't that count for something?" Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure what to think. He could feel the weight of his team's lives resting on his shoulders, and any wrong move could mean the difference between life and death. He had to stay sharp. The woman ahead stopped abruptly, raising her hand in a signal for them to halt. She didn't say a word, but her gaze swept over them, with an intensity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Her piercing silver eyes seemed to see right through him, as if she was reading his thoughts. There was no doubt about it. This was no ordinary alien. "Stay low," she said, her voice a soft whisper, but one that carried a command. "They are close." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Valorians? He glanced up toward the sky, where the battleship was now less than a mile away, its massive shape casting a dark shadow over the jungle. There was no escaping it. He motioned for the team to spread out and take cover. They crouched low, blending into the foliage as best they could, their weapons ready, eyes scanning the sky. Ethan stayed close to the woman, watching her every move. "You don't have to hide, you know," she said quietly, her voice almost soothing despite the danger. "They cannot see me." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean? You're not cloaked." The woman smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. "I don't need to be." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the sound of a Valorian drone pierced the air. The sleek, black shape zipped above them, its cloaking device malfunctioning for just a moment. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw it, and his pulse quickened. He raised his rifle, ready to take a shot if necessary, but the woman stopped him with a mere gesture. "Not yet," she said. The drone hovered, scanning the area below. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. They couldn't afford to be seen. But the woman remained still, almost serene, her gaze fixed on the drone. For a moment, Ethan could have sworn he saw her eyes flicker with something darker. Then, without any warning, she moved. It was so fast, it was like watching a blur of light. The drone's sensors whined, its cloaking system attempting to recalibrate. But before it could react, the woman raised her hand. A burst of energy shot from her fingers, colliding with the drone midair. The drone exploded in a violent flash of light, sending debris scattering through the trees. Ethan and Bonner flinched at the blast, but the woman remained unfazed, her eyes now scanning the sky for more threats. Ethan's mouth hung open. How had she done that? There was no tech involved, no weapon, just her bare hands. It was as though she had manipulated the very energy of the air around her. The woman turned toward them, her expression unreadable. "They will be looking for you now," she said. "We need to move." Ethan blinked, his thoughts a whirlwind. "What are you? Why are you helping us?" She didn't answer right away, instead walking forward, her movements as graceful as ever. The same reason anyone would help another. "Survival," she said, her voice cold, but somehow not hostile. Ethan frowned. "Survival? You don't look like you need help. You're the one saving us." She turned back, meeting his gaze with a piercing stare. "What you don't understand, human, is that we are all fighting for our lives in this galaxy. The Valorians are not your only enemies. There are forces at play here that even you cannot comprehend." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't know if she was trying to frighten him or simply being cryptic. He decided to stay quiet, not wanting to push her further. The team fell into line behind her, moving swiftly through the dense jungle. The strange woman led them deeper into the wilderness, her pace unwavering, as if she knew exactly where she was going. Ethan's mind buzzed with questions, but none of them seemed to matter as much as staying alive. The Valorian battleship wasn't far off, and the jungle's oppressive silence felt more like a countdown than a refuge. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but watch the woman. There was something unnerving about her, something powerful, yet completely unknowable. Her very presence exuded a kind of authority that felt ancient, almost like she had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. She was calm in the face of danger, her focus unwavering. Yet there was a darkness behind her eyes that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. It wasn't long before they reached a small clearing, hidden by the thick foliage. The woman gestured for them to stop and wait. Ethan's team settled into position, their weapons still drawn, eyes darting around the area. The woman moved to the center of the clearing and knelt, placing a small metallic device on the ground. The device hummed to life, a faint blue light pulsing from its core. "This will shield us from their scans," she said, her voice steady and sure. "For a time." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You have tech like that?" She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. I have more than you know. Ethan didn't press her for more details. The device was working, that much was clear. The air around them seemed to shimmer, and the forest suddenly felt quieter, almost too quiet. The Valorian battleship's presence was still looming overhead, but for now, it seemed unaware of their location. As the seconds stretched into minutes, Ethan allowed himself to relax, just slightly. But his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman. Who was she really? And what did she want with them? You still haven't told me your name, Ethan said, breaking the silence. The woman's gaze shifted toward him. There was a brief moment of hesitation, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before she spoke. I am Ezra, she said simply. Ethan nodded, absorbing the name. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ezra, why are you helping us? She met his gaze, her eyes flickering with something that could almost be described as pity. Because you're not just fighting for your lives, human. You're fighting for something far bigger. And whether you like it or not, you're going to need me. You want to survive. Ethan wasn't sure what to make of that, but one thing was certain. Ezra wasn't just any ally. She had her own agenda, and he wasn't sure if he should trust her. But for now, there was no choice but to follow her lead. The jungle around them was thick with tension. The forest, once peaceful, now felt like a battleground, each rustle in the leaves, and every snap of a twig sending a jolt through Ethan's body. Ezra led them deeper into the wilderness, her movements as fluid as water, unhindered by the dense undergrowth. It was as if she was one with the jungle, a part of it, while the rest of them were just outsiders struggling to keep up. Ethan kept his eyes on her, trying to understand her. Who was she? What was her true purpose in all of this? She had saved them from the Valorians, yet there was something in her calm demeanor, something in the way she held herself, that kept him on edge. Her eyes, cold and distant, never seemed to linger too long on any one person, as if she were always looking beyond the present, beyond what was happening around them. The distant hum of the Valorian ship had faded slightly, but Ethan knew it wasn't gone. The enemy was close, and they would be looking for them. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the weight of their pursuit. Ezra stopped abruptly, turning to face the group. Her sharp eyes scanned the horizon, as if she could sense the enemy before they even arrived. Her gaze settled on Ethan, and for the first time, he saw something akin to acknowledgement in her expression. They are coming, she said quietly. They'll be here soon. Ethan's heart raced. How do you know? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed her hand on the ground, closing her eyes. A soft, almost inaudible hum emanated from her fingertips, the air around her vibrating with an unfamiliar energy. For a moment, Ethan felt a strange pull, as if something was drawing him in. But before he could make sense of it, Ezra opened her eyes and stood up, her face unreadable once more. We need to move, she said simply, her voice no longer holding the calm assurance it once had. Now, there was an edge to it, a sense of urgency that made Ethan's instincts flare. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began moving swiftly through the trees. Ethan followed, but this time, there was a newfound determination in his steps. Something about her was drawing him in, something he couldn't quite explain. Was it the mystery surrounding her, or the undeniable power she exuded with every move? Whatever it was clear he was no longer just an observer. He was a part of this, a part of whatever Ezra was involved in, whether he liked it or not. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the air thick and heavy, the ground soft beneath their boots. Ethan's team struggled to keep up, their equipment weighing them down, their senses on high alert. But even with all the preparations, there was no escaping the danger that was fast approaching. Ezra's pace never faltered, her eyes scanning the surroundings with practiced precision. She was a predator in her own right, always alert, always aware. Ethan couldn't help but admire her in a way he hadn't felt toward anyone before. There was something about her strength, the way she held herself, that pulled at something deep inside him. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't afford to get distracted. There were lives at stake. He glanced back at Bonner, who was struggling to keep up. His friend had never been in a situation like this before. The weight of the mission, the constant pressure, was wearing on him. But Bonner was resilient, and Ethan knew he would push through. He had to. Ethan's mind flickered back to the moment when Azra had destroyed the Valorian drone with nothing but her bare hands. The raw power, the sheer energy she commanded. It was something Ethan couldn't ignore. It was like she was capable of bending the very fabric of reality to her will. And yet there was a mystery to her, something that made her seem both human and not at the same time. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Ethan found his thoughts drifting. The heat of the day, the relentless pursuit of the Valorians, it all seemed so far away when he focused on Azra. Her presence was consuming, and yet he didn't know if it was something he should fear or something he could trust. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the trees, sending a ripple of panic through the group. Azra's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. They're here. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Valorians had found them. He signaled to his team to spread out, taking up defensive positions as they prepared for the worst. The jungle around them seemed to close in, the trees casting long shadows as the light of the sun began to fade. The Valorian soldiers were coming, and there was no time to waste. Azra, however, didn't seem worried. In fact, she looked almost eager. Her eyes glinted with something Ethan couldn't place. But there was a fire in them, a fire that made his own pulse quicken. She raised her hand, and the air around her began to hum again, this time with a deeper, more powerful energy. Ethan watched in awe as the very air seemed to bend around her. She was doing something, something he couldn't fully understand, but whatever it was dangerous. "Get down," Ethan shouted, just as a blast of energy shot past them, narrowly missing the group. Azra's hand dropped, and the blast dissipated into the air, the shockwave causing the nearby trees to sway. She turned to face Ethan, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quiet, but full of intensity. "The Valorians are not the only threat. There are others, forces you cannot even begin to comprehend. And if you don't start listening, you will all die." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He wanted to ask her what she meant, but the threat of the Valorians was too close. He needed answers, but he needed to survive first. "We need to move, now," Azra commanded, her tone leaving no room for argument. The jungle erupted into chaos as the Valorian soldiers advanced, their heavy boots crashing through the underbrush. Ethan's team fired, but the enemy was swift, their advanced technology outmatching anything the humans had. It was a slaughter, plain and simple. Azra's movements were a blur as she engaged the enemy, her hands flashing out in strange, powerful arcs. Each movement was precise, controlled, deadly. She was a force of nature, and Ethan couldn't help but feel both awe and fear in equal measure as he watched her. But there was something else, something that tugged at his heart. It wasn't just her power or her strength. It was the way she moved, the way she seemed to be in perfect harmony with her surroundings. There was a beauty to it, a grace that was impossible to ignore. And then, amidst the chaos, their eyes met. It was brief, just a flash, but it felt like an eternity. For a moment, Ethan forgot about the danger, forgot about the Valorians, and all he could think about was Azra. She turned away, her focus shifting back to the battle. But the brief connection had already left its mark on him. He couldn't deny it anymore. There was something between them, something undeniable, something that was only going to grow stronger as they continued to fight for their lives. The battle raged on, but as the minutes passed, Ethan couldn't help but feel like something had changed between him and Azra. The deadly pursuit was no longer just about survival. It was about something more, something neither of them fully understood yet. But they would soon find out. The night had fallen, and the jungle was eerily silent now, the chaos of battle giving way to an unsettling calm. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sudden stillness felt like a prelude to something far worse than the fight they'd just survived. Azra was silent beside him, her presence as commanding as ever, but there was a distance in her eyes now. Her expression was unreadable, her mind clearly elsewhere. As she walked ahead of him, every step seemed calculated, every move sharp. But Ethan could tell something had changed in her. The fire in her gaze was gone, replaced with a weariness that she tried to hide. They had just survived an ambush, narrowly escaping the Valorian forces, but now they were on the run again, deeper into the jungle, with no real plan or clear direction. And in this uncertain moment, Ethan couldn't stop himself from wondering about Azra. Who was she really? The questions that had been circling in his mind since their first encounter were now demanding answers. Why had she saved them? What did she want from them? Was she truly an ally, or was there something darker at play? The longer they spent together, the more confusing it became. As they made their way through the dense foliage, Ethan noticed something that stopped him in his tracks. A faint light flickered in the distance, blue, almost ethereal, like a ghost in the night. Azra stopped too, her eyes narrowing as she too saw the light. There was no sound, no movement from it, but the glow was unmistakable. Something inside Ethan told him this was not a random occurrence. He glanced at Azra, who had already turned away, continuing to walk without another word. Azra, wait, Ethan called after her. She didn't stop. Instead, she quickened her pace, as if urging them forward. We need to keep moving. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the light was connected to everything. It was too specific, too intentional. Something in his gut told him they were being led somewhere. But was it to safety or into a trap? His curiosity got the better of him. I'm not leaving until I know what that light is. Azra paused, her back stiffening. Without turning around, she spoke in a low voice. I told you, we have to move. Trust me. Trust you, Ethan said, his voice rising despite his efforts to remain calm. After everything we've been through, after all the lies and the danger, you're asking me to trust you. For the first time since they had met, Azra turned to face him fully. The coldness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that could almost be called regret. But it didn't last. It flickered, then vanished, replaced by the hard resolve that he had come to know so well. You don't understand, she said, her voice tight. It's not just about survival. You're not ready for the truth. None of you are. Ethan stared at her, his chest tightening. Something was off. She was hiding something. And for the first time, it felt like their lives were in her hands, not just because she was the most powerful person they had encountered, but because she was the one keeping the biggest secrets. You're not telling us everything, are you? Ethan asked, taking a step forward. His voice was low but insistent. What is it that you're hiding from us? Azra's expression hardened. She turned away again, her eyes scanning the jungle ahead. But this time, Ethan saw the flash of doubt that crossed her face before she masked it. You have no idea what you're asking, she muttered, almost to herself. You don't understand what's at stake here. Ethan wasn't sure what she meant, but he knew he wasn't going to let it go. Not now, not after everything that had happened. She was either with them, or she was against them. He couldn't afford to keep second-guessing himself. Suddenly, a deep rumble vibrated through the ground beneath them, followed by the sound of something massive crashing through the trees. The hair on the back of Ethan's neck stood up. He didn't have to see it to know that they were no longer alone. Something huge, something powerful, was coming. Azra looked up sharply, her posture suddenly alert. She raised her hand, and the air around them began to hum with energy. It was the same energy she had used before, but this time there was a difference, a darker edge to it. Ethan didn't wait. He grabbed his weapon, ready for whatever was coming. The rest of the team gathered behind him, their faces filled with fear and confusion. Whatever was about to happen, they were in this together. The trees parted violently as a figure emerged from the shadows, a hulking, armored creature, Its features twisted and inhuman, stood before them. It was taller than any of the Valorians, its body covered in thick, metallic plating, its eyes glowing a deep red. Azra. The creature growled, its voice low and guttural, sending a shiver down Ethan's spine. It's time. Azra's expression remained unchanged, though Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. She stepped forward, facing the creature without hesitation. "I know," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with a finality that sent a wave of dread through Ethan. "Who is this?" Ethan demanded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "What's going on?" Azra turned to him, her gaze meeting his, and for the first time, he saw the truth in her eyes. The betrayal. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "But you were never meant to survive this." The world seemed to tilt. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process what she had just said. "What?" he whispered, barely able to speak. You're not with us. You never were." Azra's lips trembled, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw a flash of emotion. But then she hardened, her resolve solidifying. "I had to do this. You couldn't know. Not until now." The creature's voice rumbled again, but this time it wasn't directed at Ethan. It was directed at Azra. "You've kept them alive long enough. The deal is done. The time for games is over." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't understand. Why had she betrayed them? Why had she led them all this way only to turn on them? But Azra's eyes were cold again, her expression a mask of determination. "The deal is mine to end," she said, her voice steady. "It ends here, and I'll do whatever it takes to finish what I started." The realization hit him like a freight train. Azra wasn't just some ally in the fight. She had been playing a game, one that none of them had even known they were a part of. And now, everything was about to change. Before Ethan could process it further, Azra raised her hand again, and a bright flash of energy exploded from her palm, lighting up the night sky. The creature staggered back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The battle for their lives had only just begun. As the creature charged, Azra's voice rang out with an unshakable certainty. "You never should have trusted me." Ethan couldn't believe it. The betrayal stung deeper than any wound he'd ever felt. And now, in the shadow of Azra's truth, they were all caught in the storm that was just beginning. The sky was ablaze with fire as explosions lit up the distant horizon. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, every beat echoing the chaos around him. The betrayal that had ripped through his team still stung, the shock of Azra's treachery hanging heavily in the air. But there was no time to dwell on the past. The present was too urgent, too full of danger. The jungle was alive with sounds of pursuit. The creature, Azra's ally, or perhaps something darker, was still on their trail, and it wasn't slowing down. Ethan's eyes darted to the side, scanning the terrain. His team, ragtag and exhausted, struggled to keep up. The weight of Azra's words hung over them all. She had turned on them, revealed herself to be something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. But why? Why had she betrayed them? Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing forward. There was no use thinking about her now. They had to survive. They had to escape this hellhole. But escape seemed impossible. They were being hunted by creatures far more powerful, far more ruthless than anything Earth had ever encountered. And no matter how fast they ran, no matter how hard they fought, the danger was always one step ahead. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, the trees began to thin, revealing a vast clearing ahead. In the distance, Ethan saw a structure rising from the ground, a metallic building, its design sleek and unfamiliar. His breath caught in his throat. Was this a trap? A place of safety? Or something far worse? "I don't like this," said Bonner, his voice low and tense. He glanced at Ethan, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Ethan could feel it too, the unsettling quiet that now surrounded them. It was as though the very world had held its breath, waiting. But there was no time to question it. They were already being pursued. They had no choice but to move forward. The clearing was closer now, the structure looming larger. Ethan could see that it wasn't just a building. It was a fortress, with high walls and guarded entrances. This was no ordinary installation. Whoever controlled it had immense power. "We need to get inside," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We can't outrun them forever. Maybe we can find something inside, an advantage, a weapon, anything." Bonner didn't answer, but he nodded, his face tight with concern. The rest of the team fell in behind them, moving cautiously through the clearing. Every step felt like a countdown, the air thick with anticipation. They were running out of time. And then, just as they neared the fortress, a low rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. Ethan's eyes widened as the first blast hit, an explosion that sent a shockwave through the jungle, knocking them all off their feet. The sound of gunfire rang through the air, sharp and unmistakable. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart racing as he realized they were surrounded. The creature that had been pursuing them was here, and it wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, more armored soldiers, more enemies. It was too much, too many. The world seemed to slow as the reality of their situation sank in. They were trapped, outnumbered, and Azra was nowhere to be seen. Had she led them here only to leave them to die? Ethan's mind raced. He needed a plan. He needed a way out. His fingers twitched as he grabbed for his weapon. But there was no time to think. No time for hesitation. A burst of energy crackled in the air, and suddenly, a figure stepped forward. Ethan's eyes locked onto her, and for a split second, he thought he was imagining it. But no, it was her. Azra. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her stance unyielding, her face calm despite the chaos around her. She wasn't the same person she had been before. Her eyes were colder, her features harder. The woman who had once fought by their side, who had saved them, was now standing against them. "Azra," Ethan said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her hand, signaling the others to stop. Her gaze flicked over the group, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw something that almost looked like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "They were always going to find you," Azra said, her voice soft, but carrying a weight that made Ethan's blood run cold. "It was only a matter of time." "Why are you doing this?" Ethan demanded, stepping forward. "You don't have to be their ally. You don't have to betray us." Azra didn't flinch. Her eyes met his, and in them, Ethan saw the truth. She had made her choice, and no matter what he said, it was too late. "I didn't betray you," she replied, her tone cold. "I never was on your side. I was never supposed to be." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. All this time, he had believed she was one of them, one of the good guys. But now, in the light of her betrayal, he understood. She had used them. She had manipulated them. And now, they were paying the price. "You're with them," Bonner spat, his voice thick with disgust. "You're one of them." Azra's eyes flickered to Bonner, but there was no emotion in her gaze. She was a soldier, a weapon, nothing more. And now she was standing between them and any hope of survival. "Do you really think you can escape this?" Azra asked, her voice almost pitying. "This war is bigger than you, bigger than all of you. There is no escape." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ethan's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that everything changed. But there was still a glimmer of hope. They could fight back. They had to. Without thinking, Ethan lunged forward, his weapon raised. But before he could fire, a blast of energy surged through the air, knocking him back. Azra had done it. She had turned on them completely. The betrayal was final. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his body aching from the force of the blast. The rest of the team was already reacting, their weapons raised, preparing to fight. But it was clear now. Azra was no longer an ally. She was an enemy. The creature moved forward, its steps slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. "The time has come," it said, its voice low and menacing. "The war will be decided today, and you will all fall." The air around them seemed to crackle with tension. Ethan's eyes darted between Azra and the creature, his mind working furiously. This was it. This was the fight that would decide everything. And then the ground shook again. But this time, it wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a blast. It was something far worse. From the shadows of the jungle, a massive ship appeared, descending slowly toward the ground. Its surface gleamed in the moonlight, an imposing fortress in the sky. The enemy's reinforcements had arrived. Ethan knew they had only one option left. They had to make their move. Now, before it was too late. But as the ship landed and the figures began to emerge, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pushed toward something much darker than they had ever imagined. And Azra was the key. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the massive ship touched down, its engines roaring as the hull settled with a deep, resonating hum. The vast fortress loomed over them, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. And yet, despite the terror surrounding him, a quiet resolve began to settle in his chest. Azra had betrayed them, but she was not the only threat now. The creature that had stalked them, the dark figures emerging from the ship, it all led to this final clash. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something greater. The fate of everything they had fought for was hanging in the balance. As the enemy forces mobilized, preparing for the assault, Ethan's mind flashed back to the days when everything had seemed simple, when it had been him and his team against the world, when the only enemy had been the unknown. But now, it was different. The stakes were higher. The price was greater. He glanced at his team. Bonner, bruised and bloodied, but still standing tall. Gina, her face a mask of determination, despite the exhaustion in her eyes. And then there was Cale, a young soldier who had just joined their ranks. His fear was palpable, but there was something else too, something burning deep inside him, a fierce will to fight, to protect. Ethan turned his gaze back to Azra, still standing on the outskirts of the clearing. She wasn't the same person who had once fought alongside them. She wasn't the person he had trusted, the woman who had saved him in countless battles. Now she was the enemy, cold and unfeeling. He wanted to shout at her, to demand answers, to make her see reason. But there was no time for that. Not anymore. Instead, he spoke the only words that seemed to matter. We fight, or we die here." Bonner nodded, his hand tightening around his weapon. "Then we fight." The first shot rang out, sharp and unforgiving. It was followed by the deafening sound of explosions, and the battlefield erupted into chaos. Ethan's heart raced as he ducked behind a nearby rock, returning fire with pinpoint accuracy. The air around him was filled with the staccato sound of weapons discharging, the screams of soldiers caught in the crossfire, and the thunderous roar of the enemy forces advancing. But in the midst of the madness, there was something that caught Ethan's attention. A figure standing just outside the clearing, moving with unnatural grace. It was Azra. She wasn't just watching the battle unfold. She was preparing to join it. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment that everything had been leading up to. If Azra was still standing against them, then they were truly alone. No one was coming to help them. No one could save them. It was all on them now. A wave of anger washed over him, and before he could stop himself, Ethan surged forward, charging toward Azra. The chaos of the battle raged around him, but all that mattered in that moment was reaching her, confronting her, finding out why she had done this. Azra turned as he approached, her eyes cold and calculating. She didn't seem surprised, not in the slightest. Instead, she raised her weapon, aiming it squarely at him. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice a bitter whisper, barely audible over the gunfire. "This isn't about you, Ethan. This is about survival. This is about the future. You're fighting for a lost cause." Ethan's pulse quickened. "A lost cause. You're the one who's lost, Ezra. You've betrayed everything we stood for." Her eyes flickered, something like regret passing through them, but it was quickly masked by the icy resolve that had taken over. "I never stood for your cause," she said. "I stand for the future of our species, the future of our people. By destroying everything." Ethan shot back. "By tearing us apart." She didn't respond. Instead, she fired. The blast hit the ground just inches from his feet, sending a spray of dirt and debris into the air. Ethan dove to the side, rolling to his feet and returning fire. The intensity of the battle around them only seemed to increase as the ground trembled beneath them, and the enemy forces pressed in from all sides. Ethan knew they couldn't keep this up. There was too much firepower, too many enemies. They had to make a choice, fight to the death, or find a way to end this once and for all. As if on cue, the massive fortress doors opened, and the shadowy figures began to spill out into the clearing. The creature that had been hunting them was at the front, its form towering over the others, its eyes glowing with malevolent energy. Ethan's heart sank. This was no ordinary soldier. This was the leader, the one who had been pulling the strings all along. Without thinking, Ethan charged toward the creature, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no plan, no strategy. He just knew he couldn't let this creature win. He couldn't let Ezra's betrayal be the end of it all. The creature turned to face him, its eyes narrowing. "Foolish human," it said, its voice low and filled with disdain. "Do you really think you can stop me?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he lunged forward, his weapon aimed at the creature's chest. But before he could make contact, a blast of energy sent him flying backward, crashing to the ground. Dazed, Ethan struggled to get to his feet, his vision swimming. He could hear the sounds of the battle around him. The gunfire, the explosions, the screams, but it all felt distant, muffled. His body ached, his head pounding. He was out of time. If he didn't act now, it would all be over. But then, something unexpected happened. A flash of light pierced through the battlefield. The ground trembled once again. But this time, it wasn't from the enemy's weapons. It was from something else. Something powerful. A figure appeared, moving through the smoke and dust, moving with purpose. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the silhouette. It was Ezra. But this time, she wasn't pointing a weapon at him. She wasn't fighting against him. Instead, she was charging toward the creature, her movements fluid and determined. She had turned on them, on the ones who had fought beside her, who had trusted her. But now, in this final moment, she was making the ultimate choice. She was fighting for something else. The creature roared as Ezra closed the distance, her weapon raised, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering resolve. Ethan's heart surged with a new hope, a new determination. This wasn't over. Not yet. Not if they could fight together. And so, the final battle began, one that would decide everything. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for love, for redemption, for the future. The fate of the galaxy, the fate of their world, rested in this moment. As the battle raged on, Ethan's focus never wavered. He fought with everything he had. And as the final blow landed, he realized that the greatest triumph wasn't just in victory. It was in the love that had brought them this far.